I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into the story. And it really confirmed. I decided Saturday night to preach on this. And then Sunday morning, who was here Sunday morning? I mean, several of you were. You remember what Brother Riley preached on?
Yeah.
What did he talk about? Or what story from the Bible did he use? It's a hard question, isn't it? It's like remembering what you had for dinner last night.
Days ago, man. I'm trying to
He talked about Moses. He did like basically the first 3 chapters of Exodus, which were about Moses and... Shh. Nick, I just said it.
You just said it. Hey, what chapter is that?
That's in, we're going to go chapters 5 through 12 tonight, but he started off with Moses, and he went up to chapter 3, which is with the burning bush, and that was actually where I wanted to start my message. So I'm like, okay, well, I can tell God's working, he's doing something here. And you guys know kind of the backstory of Moses. He was born, in Egypt. There was like an evil Pharaoh.
We were going to kill all the
right.
Boys of
Yeah, the Egyptians were the slave masters, and the Israelites were like the slaves. And the Egyptians were afraid that the Israelites were going to get too big. So they came up with this idea. They were going to kill all the baby boys who were born that year, like in Egypt, from the Israelites. And Moses was kind of a miracle baby because his mom, she knew that if she kept him, he would just get killed. So she put him in a basket. Yeah, and an Egyptian girl picked him up, and she raised him. Yeah, Pharaoh's daughter. Basically, and I don't want to go through all that. He ran away. He became a shepherd. He was shepherding one day, and he comes across a burning bush, and that's kind of where my sermon starts. Have you guys ever seen a burning bush before?
Yeah.
Because it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to relate to because we don't live like in a desert.
While it's burning,
But
after it's burning, unfortunately.
well, I don't know any time in there. But basically, I did see a burning bush one time because I was in my grandpa's house, and he was burning brushes and stuff, and he grabbed a bush, and I just remember it because it made me think of Moses. I remember him sticking it in, and it took about from the time the flames touched it, it took about 10 seconds. It like went whoosh, right through the bush. I mean, if you poured gasoline on it, it wouldn't have burned any quicker. And so bushes burn quick. And this bush caught Moses' eye. He just looked at this bush, and Moses looked down at the burning bush of fire, and it burned, and the flames went higher, and it just kept burning. And he started hearing God speak to him through the bush, and God was saying, I want you to go to Egypt and set my people free. And Moses, he argues with the bush for a long time, and so I'm thinking Moses probably isn't very smart, because if you saw like a bush that wouldn't stop burning, and
talking to you.
Yeah, and it was talking to you, and it told you to do something, I just can't imagine arguing with it.
You're like, no,
Yeah.
burning bush.
Well, so Moses says, who am I going to say sent me? And the bush says, say that I am sent you. And Moses says, all right, how am I going to get him to listen to me? And he says, show them what we call the plagues. Actually, God he calls them different things. He calls them plagues sometimes. He calls them signs. He calls them wonders. And whenever you hear about the plagues in a few minutes, you think that they're terrible. I'm going to kind of talk about why they were terrible, but why it's kind of right to call them wonders, why they kind of were a good thing. And so I'm just going to start when Moses went to Pharaoh. That's Exodus chapter 5. And he had his brother Aaron with him, because Moses was too scared to do it by himself, so he got Aaron to go. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." And what did Pharaoh say? Yeah,
No.
He said no. He said, Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go." So then Moses and Aaron said, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword." So Moses wanted basically 3 things. He wanted the people to go. He wanted to make sacrifices to God. He wanted to make a feast to God. That's in God's honor. Those are the 3 things that he was kind of after. So Pharaoh says, no, I'm not going to listen. I don't really care about your God. So they want to show Pharaoh that they mean business. Pharaoh sends the first plague. The first plague was whenever Pharaoh gets up in the morning and he went out into the river Nile. And that's a few pictures of it from modern times. It's not that big. And God said, whenever Pharaoh gets up and goes there in the morning, I want you to walk out and put your staff in the water. Actually had Aaron do it. And right then, the water bled. And it wasn't just the water in the Nile. It was the water all Egypt. It all got turned to what?
Even in the wells?
In the wells, everywhere, all the water. It was like that for like 7 days.
What about the
They couldn't drink all the sinks,
All the water.
all the swimming pools. It probably looked like the Kool-Aid man had peed in the pool. That's how red everything.
Oh, yeah.
And anyway, and I'm going to mention, I'll tell you why I'm mentioning this. The Egyptians had a god of the Nile. The god was named Happy or Hoppy. I don't really know how to say it. Pharaoh went to his magicians and it's Hapi. Pharaoh went to his magicians and he said, I want you guys to duplicate this trick. I want you guys to do it too. And I don't know how the magicians did it, like if they used tricks like magicians do today, or if they were using like some kind of demon magic type of thing. They were able to turn water into blood too, or at least make it look like they did. So whenever they did that, Pharaoh said, well, then if my magicians can do it, then this God must not be a very big deal. And he kind of blew it off that all the water got turned to blood. He just didn't care. So they brought a second plague. The second plague was that frogs came up out of water and hopped all over Israel. I tried to find like a different kind of picture for every.
That's like awesome.
Yeah, I kind of like frogs, but
Those look like friendly frogs.
But, we see toads a lot. Frogs are pretty slimy. And I don't know if they were grossed out by them, but basically the frogs were everywhere. It kind of did drive him crazy. I mean, that was the point of it. There were frogs all over the place. This one actually got to Pharaoh. He went to his magicians. He said, can you guys make frogs, just start coming up out of the water? So the magicians did something. I don't know what they did. They were able to duplicate the miracle again in their own way. It doesn't really say how they did it. But this time Pharaoh says, okay. Oh, and by the way, the Egyptians had a god of fertility, which was a frog. So the Egyptians had a god for everything. I'll tell you why I'm telling you that later. But basically, God went the Pharaoh went to Moses and he said, okay, if you can get rid of all these frogs and make them stop driving us crazy, we'll let you go tomorrow. So right then, and Moses said, okay, deal. Right then, all the frogs in Israel just like dropped dead. There were just like dead frogs everywhere. It said that they had to rake them all up into piles and it was really stinky. And then the next day, Pharaoh changed his mind. He said, I've changed my mind. You can't go. So after 2 plagues, it still hadn't got through to him. Let's see. The third plague was that God said for Moses to have Aaron stretch out his hand over.
Why do you
What?
say Moses and
Well, Moses and Aaron were working as a team, but this is when Aaron actually held his staff up, and out of the dust of the earth, lice started coming up everywhere. Have you guys ever had?
lice like that?
No, they were tiny. They were just really annoying. I mean, who's ever had lice? We had lice. My sister, like the first day of kindergarten, got. Yeah, that's how big it is. It's really gross. I googled pictures of this stuff, and it was nasty. That wasn't actually a very gross one. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you got to shave your head, and that's why the Egyptians had shaved heads a lot, is because they were sick of bugs and stuff getting in their hair. So anyway, this was kind of against the Egyptian god. I can't see his name. His name was Geb. No, that's fine. His name was Geb. He was the god of the earth, and God made lice come up. He used the dust to make lice come up, and Pharaoh had his magicians try to duplicate this miracle, but this time they actually couldn't. Do you know why that is? Does anyone have a guess why the magicians couldn't do this one?
They can't turn the dirt into a bug.
Right. They can't create life, is really the thing. Only God has the power to create life. And they couldn't make life out of the dust. That's something that God did in the book of Genesis. But yeah. And the reason I was pointing out the gods as I went through this, because the false gods, that's kind of what God is going after through these plagues. And that's why it's an act of judgment whenever God's sending these plagues on the people. It's an act of judgment. It's also kind of an act of love because he's kind of showing them your gods are worthless. They're not as great as you think that they are. And something I kind of wanted to get across in this story is we kind of look at it like Egyptians were the bad guys and the Israelites were the good guys. And that's kind of making it a really black and white thing. That, in all honesty, if you just read a little bit further, the Israelites were not really good guys either. They were jerks. Every chance they got, they worshiped false gods too. And the Egyptians were bad, but the Israelites were not really that much better. I mean, they were foolish. They were murderous. They just didn't have the power that the Egyptians had. You know, the Egyptians could enslave them, but a few books later, the Israelites are enslaving people too. And anyway, you might think that the Israelites were good guys because God chose them. But, you know, we're not such good guys either. I mean, we do terrible stuff. And even if we're not enslaving people or killing them, I mean, we do bad things all the time. And God chose us. I mean, if you're a Christian, you might think that you chose God, but really God chose you. And God didn't choose you because we're so good. He chose you because he's so good. So let's go ahead and go on to the fourth plague. The next one is... They were flies. I probably could just look up there and find it faster. There were flies everywhere. The God sent flies all over the land. I know how annoying it is whenever I get like one fly. You know, there were like millions. There were billions of flies. The Egyptians had a fly god. I don't remember his name, but they had a fly god. I don't know why. They had a god for just about everything. So they were so annoying. This time Pharaoh said, "Okay, you can go out and make a sacrifice. I'll let you go make a sacrifice if that'll get rid of the flies." So Moses did, because that was one of the three things he wanted. Let his people go make a sacrifice, go have a feast in God's honor. The Pharaoh lets him go have the sacrifice, but then as soon as the flies were gone, he changed his mind. And at this point in the story, I'm kind of thinking we do that a lot too. Like we go to God and we try to say, we try to make deals with God. You know, we kind of try to barter, and God doesn't want us to. He doesn't want us to try to do some kind of deal with him where he's forced to bless us, or do something where we have to force ourselves to, submit to him. Kind of reminds me of this joke, and I hope I'm telling it right, but like there was this guy, and he was walking down the railroad tracks, which is dumb, but because he gets his foot stuck and the train starts coming, and the train's bearing down on him, and he says, he's like, God, please let me free. If you get me out of this, I'll stop smoking. But the train keeps coming. He says, okay, God, I'll give up smoking. I'll give up cussing. If you just get my feet out of the, it's going to kill him. And nothing happens. So finally he says, okay, God, it's just almost there. He's like, God, I'll quit smoking. I'll quit cussing. I'll quit drinking. I'll give all my money to the poor. Just let me. And then his foot comes free and he slides away. Train goes whooshing past. And he gets up and he kind of brushes himself off. And he says, well, thanks anyway, God. But I took care of that one myself. Okay, it's not very funny. But the point is, we don't want to treat God like he's a 911 God that you only talk to him whenever you have a problem. You need to have a relationship with God every day. I hope you guys are praying every day, because it's always easy if we have a problem with thing, if we need help. But if that's the only time you go to God, who wants a friend that's always comes and they just tug on your arm or show you any kind of affection if they need something? I mean, do you guys know anybody like that? That only comes to you when they...
It's called Nick.
Yeah.
Moochers.
Yeah, kind of like a moocher. So God doesn't want us to be moochers either, and He won't let you use Him like that. I mean, He might help you out, but if you want Him to be your Lord, you need to actually put time into your relationship with Him, not just whenever you need something. So, with that said, let's go on to because I don't have much more time, and I don't want to keep you guys here late. Let's go to the fifth plague. This is a picture from modern times. This is probably what it looked like. All the Egyptians, not the Israelites' livestock, just the Egyptians' livestock, were stricken with disease. They were all wiped out. It probably looked a lot like that. Probably smelled really bad. And with this one, and the Egyptians, they did have a god of the bulls named Apis and a god of the cows named Hathor. And this one, basically, Pharaoh went outside. He looked, he saw that the Israelites' cows were fine, the Egyptians' cows were all dead, and he went back inside. He just basically walked away from it. So they tried again to get his attention. They sent the 6th plague. This one, you'll see, I didn't even get a picture of the 6th one because it was so gross. I Googled it. It was boils. And he had boils come up over people. I didn't know what they looked. I thought they were like little red dots. I Googled boil. No. Anybody ever had a boil?
I've seen.
You've seen one?
It's not good.
It was so gross. I was about to puke after the lice. So I didn't even get a picture of a boil. But God, just the Egyptians, they got boils all over them. And they were itchy. They were painful. They were bleeding. I guess that's what boils do. Go Google it later if you want to, but I don't think it's a good idea. So this is the point. Oh, and Pharaoh, this was against the Egyptian god named Imhotep, who was the god of medicine, because they tried to put medicine on the boils and it wouldn't do anything. So God went to his magicians and said, "Can you do some sort of magic thing? And can you get it using your Egyptian magic? Can you get it off of me?" And the magicians couldn't even stand because they were in so much pain from the boils. So that's how bad it was. They were bed-stricken. And anyway, this is the point that Moses goes to Pharaoh, and he says, "I have a word for you from God. God wants you to know that if he wanted to kill you, he would have done it with one plague." This is why I think that the plagues were kind of an act of love on God's part, because God said, "I could have just sent a sickness on you, wiped you all out with one plague. The Israelites would have been free. You guys would have been dead. Whole mess would have been tied up." But what God's trying to do is he's trying to show them that your gods are not all that great, because all these are going up against some sort of Egyptian god. And God's saying, you guys think you have these, that these gods are worthy of your worship, but they're just not worth the time. They can't stand up. They can't take care of you. Yeah, and can you guys agree with me on this? It's not God's desire that anyone should die and go to hell, right? Even the Egyptians, even though they did bad things, we all do bad things. And I really believe God wanted the Egyptians saved, as much as the Israelites did, because he loves all people everywhere. What? Yeah, but they were choosing. He was tearing down their gods, and sometimes God has to come into our lives, and he has to tear down our gods too. And it's for our own good, because it's kind of like he puts a scalpel on your life, and it's really painful at that moment when he's cutting it away. But I tell you what, 10 minutes later, I'm not even going to say specific things, because kind of the nice thing whenever you start talking about idols or things that you need to get out of your life, you can always think of them really quick on your own. And when God has to come in and cut that out of your life, it's not usually it's really painful right then. The next day, you're going to feel so free. That's what it does when God shows you that he's the only one really worth serving. It fills you with freedom. That's true freedom. You're not enslaved to anything. Let's go on to the... so Moses is pointing all this out to Pharaoh, and that God could have just killed him if he wanted to. Moses said, "Submit to the true Lord, let his people go." But then Pharaoh's like, "Hey Moses, there ain't no easy way out, but I will not back down. I'm going to stand my ground," just like Tom Petty did, except I'm kind of paraphrasing. And so they had to send another plague. Moses said, "Here's your warning. You're going to have to..." Yeah, this is the 7th plague.
Do you have a picture of it?
I do. Made of Legos. No, they're hailstones. God said, "Here's your warning. Stay inside and you'll be fine. Go outside, you're going to get hit by hailstones." It was really easy to avoid this plague. It says some of the Egyptians did. They stayed inside. Others they wanted to be defiant. They went outside, and it said they killed all the bushes that were out there, all the people, any livestock that they took out. All of it got wiped out. So this is the point that Pharaoh comes to Moses now, and Pharaoh says, "Okay, I've really screwed up. Pharaoh is saying, I finally learned my lesson." And by the way, this was against their sky god named Horus. But anyway, he says, "I'll let you guys go if you just make the hail stop falling on my people every time they go outside." So God makes the hail stop falling. Pharaoh changes his mind. He up to his same old tricks. Basically, Pharaoh told Moses, one does not simply walk out of Egypt. And so God had to send the 8th plague. This time, God went after their god of the crops, Ermutet, their god of the harvest named Thermuth. God sent locusts, and they covered all of Egypt. This time, Pharaoh said, okay, I've had enough. Like, the locusts, I guess they really bugged him, because he said, you can take your people and go, and I'll let you have a feast and all that stuff you wanted to do. The only catch is you have to leave the women and the children behind. So Moses had to kind of consider this one, because up until now this is the first time he's been allowed to let anyone go, and he's thinking, should I just take the men out and then come back for the women later? You know, what should I do? Deal or no deal, basically.
I choose the woman way back. You can't.
Joplin, man.
So Moses says no deal.
Go ahead.
So then the next plague, God sent darkness on the land for 3 days. And this one, it was so dark, you couldn't even see the letters that I put up that said the 9th plague. It was just all black. They said that you couldn't light a candle in Egypt. And the darkness was so consuming, they said you could even feel it. So I don't know what that means exactly. It was heavy.
Like a really, really dark place. You can feel the dark.
I guess so. So anyway, the only place in all of Egypt that had any light at all was the town that the Israelites lived in, but everywhere else had darkness. And this was going up against the Israelites' god of the sun god, which is probably their famous and most well known. Do you guys know the name of him? Ra, yeah. That's the one that they kind of worshipped above all else. R-A, Ra. Yeah.
Like raw chicken. Raw.
This time, Pharaoh comes to Moses and he has another deal. He says, okay, I'll let you take the men and the women and the children out, but you have to leave the animals behind. Now, this is actually a really good deal. This is a really good deal because, yeah, and it could have really worked out for him. I think this is one that I probably would have taken because I'm not as good as Moses. I probably would have just taken the women and children, and I would have been like, hey, I got my people. But Moses still said no deal because God wanted them to take everything that belonged to them. So they had to send one final plague on the land of Egypt. I'm going to read to you a passage. It's not on the PowerPoint, but I'm going to, not this one. I'm just going to read this one real quick. The Lord said to Moses, I'm going to bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. Afterward, he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, you will surely drive you out of here altogether. Then Moses said, Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on the throne, even to the firstborn of the female servant who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of all the animals. So who's going to die? Right. The firstborn. Who's going to do the killing? Who's doing it himself? No, not Pharaoh.
God?
God's doing the killing.
Wait,
Well, it's
what?
angel of death, remember?
Well, yeah, but it actually says in here, God says, I will go out into the middle of Egypt. So God's, or whether he sent an angel of death, he's taking credit for this one. He says, I'm going to do this myself. But there was a way out. There was a way out of this plague. He gave him kind of a trap door. He said, what you have to do is you have to take a baby lamb, and that's why I got this picture of a cute lamb.
Oh, no.
Because if I got a picture of the full face, it was just too much, so I just went with half of a face.
Oh.
He said yeah, it was. And I thought you guys would get distracted. He says, if you just take a lamb, he says, I think he said, cut its neck, drain the blood. Well, I'll let you read it. I'll read it here. He says you have to basically take the blood and put it on the lamppost of your house. Your lamb should be without blemish, a male of the first year. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat. Now the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, this is God saying, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. The plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. And this day shall be a memorial to you. So basically, they're getting kind of what they wanted from the beginning. They're getting their first sacrifice, their first feast in God's honor. And if they follow these 2 rules, if you're an Israelite, if you're an Egyptian, if you put the blood of the lamb over your door, then you will not be hit with the angel of death. So there's an easy trap door, but you got to take a lamb without blemish. It's got to be an innocent baby lamb. So you're saying, you're thinking, God is, you're saying, no, listen, exactly. It's a really hard thing to do because you're saying, God, this is just kind of mean. I mean, it's just kind of random.
He tells us to jump off the Empire State Building, you still have to do it.
Well, Jesus said, walk out on the water towards me, and he walked on the water until he doubted.
Yeah.
And then he said,
But here's why God wanted him to take the blood of a baby lamb, because it seems kind of random and it seems kind of mean, but he's trying to show you something. He wants you to make a sacrifice because down the road he's going to make a bigger sacrifice. He's doing all this to point to Jesus because about 1,600 years after this, the Israelites, after they were set free, there was another baby born. And he was also born in a kingdom where there was an evil ruler who wanted to kill all the baby boys that year. And also like Moses, he was born at a time when, this baby, he grew up, he lived a perfect life. And when John the Baptist first saw him, you remember what John the Baptist said? He said, look, it's the Lamb of God. He's going to take away the sins of the world. And then this lamb, he lived the life that you and I should have lived. He died the life that you and I should have died. That lamb was Jesus. I'm sure you figured that out by now. But, Jesus went to the cross for us. Here's how it was described by Isaiah whenever Jesus went to the cross. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. So, but I'm going to kind of close. I'm going to read just a little bit more from the Isaiah thing, but I just want to pray real quick. I'll read a few more verses and I'll just dismiss you guys. If you need to ride home, let me know. Probably you all need to ride home. But let's just bow our eyes for a second. Let's just pray.
Can I not go first this time?
Just bow your head for a minute. I just want to say, God, if there's anyone here who really needed to hear this tonight, I feel like you wanted me to speak this for a reason. So, God, if there's anybody here who needs to hear this, if they're hearing this for the first time, or, God, I just want you to impress these words on our hearts, Lord, and just open our hearts to receive this. He says that Jesus, he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned our own way. And the Lord has laid on him, on Jesus, the iniquity of us all. So that's the end of the story. And then you can lift your heads up. God, he did pass through that night. And the Egyptians, they didn't listen. They didn't have the blood of the lamb covering them. But the Israelites, he passed over them. And that's true for our lives too. If you're not a Christian, you're a slave to sin. And just like the Israelites were slaves, we're slaves too. And we can't get out of that bondage without God delivering us from it. And death, someday we're all going to die. And the only way, whenever you die, the only way you can be saved is by the blood of the Lamb, just like it happened with the Israelites. So I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to end it right there. But I just want you all to remember the sacrifice that God made for us. If anyone, I'll just put this out there, that if anyone has never accepted that sacrifice that Jesus made for us, then go ahead and come up and see me afterwards. But just throughout the week, if there's one thing I want you guys to obsess over, I want you to obsess over what Jesus did on the cross, because that was the most important moment in history. If there's one thing you should build your life around, that would be the moment. So I'll leave it right there. If anyone wants to see me, you come do that. And if not, here in about 10 minutes or so, I'll give you guys a ride home. Yeah.
Woo, woo.